They threw me out and said, "You're a curse. You'll die alone." Years later, I returned. But by then, everything had changed. They threw me out and said, "You're a curse. You'll die alone." That was the last sentence I heard before the door slammed in my face, sharp, final, and merciless. Even now, after all these years, that moment plays in my head like a haunting melody I can't turn off. It wasn't just the words. It was the way they looked at me, not with sadness or sympathy, but with disgust. With blame. As if I had killed him. His mother didn't cry at the funeral. Not a single tear. She stood tall and dry-eyed while I wept over Rafik's casket. Her silence was louder than a scream, and her stare, cold, sharp, judging, never left me. I remember trembling under it, too weak to meet her eyes, too broken to defend myself. I had lost my husband, the only man who had ever made me feel truly loved. And in the very same breath, I was about to lose everything else. The day after the funeral, I woke up early and quietly lit a candle beside Rafik's photo. I sat in the corner of our bedroom, his favorite shawl wrapped around my shoulders, whispering to him as if he could still hear me. "I don't know how to do this without you," I said, my voice barely above a breath. I didn't even hear the footsteps until the door opened behind me. His mother entered, flanked by his older sister and younger brother. Their faces were unreadable. "You need to leave," his mother said flatly. I blinked, confused. "Leave? I don't understand." She pointed toward the suitcase I hadn't unpacked since we came back from the hospital. "You've brought nothing but misfortune into this house. Ever since you married Rafik, things started falling apart. We lost the shop, he lost his peace, and now he's gone. You were the curse." Her words landed like a slap. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. I looked at his sister, searching her face for some sense of decency, but she folded her arms and said, "We knew something bad would happen the moment he brought you home. We just didn't expect it to happen this soon." "I'm carrying his child," I whispered, pressing a trembling hand to my swollen belly. "I have nowhere else to go." "That's not our problem," his brother muttered from behind. "You were never one of us. He died, and with him, your place in this house died too." I wanted to scream. I wanted to fall to my knees and beg, plead, but my pride wouldn't let me. My grief had exhausted all my strength. I couldn't fight them, not in that moment. Still, I tried once more. Rafik would never allow this. He loved me. This was our home. His mother stepped closer, and for the first time, I saw fire in her eyes. "If he truly loved you, he wouldn't have died so young. Maybe if he'd married someone else, someone lucky, someone pure, he'd still be alive." Those words crushed something in me. That was when I realized I wasn't talking to a grieving family. I was talking to executioners. They escorted me to the front door as if I were a stranger. No warmth. No humanity. Just fury and coldness. I stumbled down the steps with my suitcase dragging behind me like a coffin. I turned back once, just once, hoping someone, anyone, would change their mind. But they didn't. Instead, his sister leaned out of the doorway and spat those final words like poison. "You're a curse. You'll die alone." And then, the door closed. It was raining. Of course, it was. The kind of rain that soaks your soul and makes you wonder if the sky itself is mourning with you. I stood on the sidewalk for hours, shivering, not knowing where to go. Every plan I had for my future had Rafik in it. Every hope I had was buried beside him. I tried calling a friend from my old job, but my phone battery was dead. I had no charger, no umbrella, no food. Only the baby inside me and a heart that felt like it was cracking open. I found a bus stop nearby and sat there, soaked and silent. People walked by me like I was invisible, like I didn't exist. The world kept moving, and I had stopped. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the puddles forming in the gutter, thinking about how quickly a life can collapse. Just 3 days ago, I was a wife, a mother-to-be, a daughter-in-law, a part of a family. And now, I was just a shadow that everyone blamed. Curse. But deep inside me, even in that moment of utter brokenness, a small ember of defiance sparked. I didn't know it then, but it would grow into something they'd never be able to put out. They had thrown me away like garbage, expecting me to vanish. But I wasn't gone. Not yet. And I certainly wasn't done. After that night, I learned what true loneliness felt like. The kind of loneliness that doesn't just mean being alone, but being forgotten, erased. No one called. No one searched for me. It was like I had never existed in the first place. I spent the next few days wandering through the streets with my suitcase dragging behind me, stomach growing tighter from hunger, my baby kicking inside as if reminding me he was still there, that he needed me. I finally found shelter in an abandoned building on the outskirts of town. The windows were broken, the floors dusty, and there was no electricity or running water, but it was a roof. And for someone who had just been treated like a ghost, it was a small mercy. Every night, I curled up in the corner on a pile of rags, hands wrapped protectively around my belly, whispering stories to my unborn child. Not because I believed he could hear me, but because I needed to hear myself speak. I needed to believe there was still a part of me that hadn't died when they threw me out. On the fourth day, an old woman named Kala found me. She lived in a nearby village and saw me begging outside a food stall. I must have looked more broken than I realized, because she didn't hesitate. She took me in. Her home was modest. One bed. One stove. No family. Just her and the silence she had grown used to. At first, I was too ashamed to speak. I didn't tell her anything about my past. But she didn't ask either. She simply gave me warm food, a place to sleep, and quiet company. Sometimes kindness doesn't come with questions. It just sits beside your pain and waits for you to breathe again. Within a week, I started helping her around the house, sweeping, cooking, washing clothes. And then she introduced me to a local tailor who needed help stitching clothes. I didn't know how to sew, but I learned quickly. Needles pierced my fingers daily. My back ached from sitting hunched for hours. But I kept going. Because I had no choice. I earned just enough to buy basic groceries. Kala never asked me for rent. She said my help was enough. And in some strange way, that little dusty house with its cracked walls became my refuge. The months passed slowly. My body changed. My belly grew. But so did something else. A quiet fire. I stopped crying every night. I stopped checking my reflection and seeing only a victim. I began to see someone different in the mirror, someone I had never met before. Someone who was surviving, quietly, fiercely. I gave birth to my son on a cold morning in that same house. No hospital. No fancy crib. Just me, Kala, and a pair of trembling hands doing the best they could. When I held him for the first time, I cried so hard I thought my chest would collapse. He was tiny. Fragile. But he looked up at me with eyes that were wide, alert, and filled with something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. I named him Zayn. It meant beauty and grace. Everything I wished his life would be, even if mine wasn't. From that moment on, my world changed again. Not with heartbreak, but with purpose. I worked harder than ever before. I took every stitching job I could find. I worked until my hands went numb. Sometimes I didn't eat so that Zayn could. I walked miles to get medicine when he had fevers. I learned how to treat rashes, colic, bruises, infections, everything a mother has to learn when the world gives her nothing. And slowly, painfully, I built a life. A tiny one. A fragile one. But mine. No one knew who I was. I went by a different name now. I never spoke about Rafiq or his family or the storm that threw me into this life. Because in this quiet corner of the world, I wasn't a curse. I was just a woman trying to survive for her child. But late at night, when Zayn was asleep and the village was silent, I would lie awake and think about them. About how easily they threw me away. About the lies they used to justify it. And I would wonder, had they forgotten me already? Did they tell others I had run away? Did they ever regret it? Or did they sit in that house, counting the money from Rafiq's business, living comfortably off the life I had been cut out from? Those thoughts didn't consume me. Not yet. But they lived in a quiet corner of my heart. A place I didn't visit often, but I knew I would, one day. Because while I had buried my past to protect my present, the past hadn't buried me. And someday, it would come back, not as a broken girl, but as someone unrecognizable. It happened on a quiet evening, just like any other. Zayn was asleep, curled beside me with his tiny fingers wrapped around mine. I had just finished folding a stack of newly stitched clothes when an old book fell from the shelf. It hit the floor with a dull thud, its pages scattering open. Curious, I picked it up, a book I hadn't touched in years, packed in a hurry the night they threw me out. I hadn't even known it was still with me. And there it was. A sealed envelope, yellowed by time, hidden between its pages. My name on the front. Rafik's handwriting. My heart stopped. With trembling hands, I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet, his will. Handwritten. Dated just a week before his death. I leave all my assets, properties, and shares to my beloved wife, Alia, and our unborn child, it read. I couldn't breathe. The paper fluttered in my lap as my world spun. All this time, they knew. They had stolen not just my dignity, but what was legally and rightfully mine. They had lied, manipulated, betrayed me in a way far deeper than I'd ever imagined. I looked at Zayn sleeping peacefully, unaware of the storm that had just reignited in his mother's heart. I had survived in silence. But silence wasn't enough anymore. They thought I was gone. They thought I was broken. But I wasn't. Not anymore. The day after I found Rafik's will, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, staring into the darkness, listening to Zayn's soft breaths. My heart was racing, not with fear this time, but with purpose. For years, I had swallowed my pain, accepted crumbs, hid from the world. But now I had proof, and something even more powerful than justice. I had clarity. The next morning, I packed our things and left the village. I hugged Kala tightly, thanked her for saving me, and promised I'd return. She didn't ask questions. Her eyes, wise and knowing, simply shined with pride. In the city, everything moved fast. I felt like a ghost walking through familiar streets that once watched me fall. But I wasn't here to remember. I was here to rise. I used the little savings I had to hire a lawyer. I showed her the will. At first, she looked at me with doubt, until she read it. This changes everything, she said. Legal proceedings began. Slow, painful, expensive, but real. Meanwhile, I worked. Harder than ever. I took stitching orders by day, watched business tutorials at night. I taught myself branding, marketing, management, anything I could get my hands on. I used the pain they gave me and poured it into something powerful. Months passed. Then a year. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back. Strong, sharp, silent, but not small. They had stolen everything from me. But I was about to take it all back. And this time, they wouldn't even see me coming. I stood outside the gates of the house they had thrown me out of. The same iron gates that once felt like prison bars when they shut behind me that rainy night. This time, I wasn't crying. This time, I was holding the keys. The court case had taken over a year, but we had won. Rafik's will was undeniable. Everything they had stolen, the house, the business shares, the bank accounts, were returned to me, legally and publicly. Their fake documents were exposed. Their lies dragged into the light. But it wasn't just about money. It was about reclaiming what they told me I never deserved. I didn't arrive in a showy car or bring cameras. I didn't need to. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it walks in silently, wearing calm like armor. I was dressed in all black, not for mourning, but for rebirth. My hair neatly tied, my eyes steady. Zayn held my hand, curious but calm. He was 5 now, tall for his age, with Rafik's eyes and my quiet defiance. The house was still the same, the beige walls, the carved wooden door, the cracked potted plant by the entrance. And yet, everything felt different. Because I was different. A neighbor peeked through her curtain. Another man watering his plants froze, recognizing me. Whispers started before I even knocked. And then, the door opened. It was her. His mother. The woman who had told me I would die alone. Her hair was grayer now. Her face thinner. But her eyes, still full of bitterness. She didn't speak at first. Just stared. Then, "What are you doing here?" I stepped forward and handed her a copy of the court order. "I believe you've had enough time to gather your things." She looked down at the paper, disbelief washing over her like waves. "This can't be. This is our home." "No," I said, my voice steady. "It was Rafik's. And he left it to me." "You knew it. You hid the will. You lied. And now, it's time you left." Behind her, I saw his sister appear. And then his brother. Their faces drained of all color. No more arrogance. No more smug laughter. Just silence. The kind of silence that comes when karma finally knocks on the door. They tried to argue. Plead. His sister said I was being cruel. That I should be forgiving. I looked at her, remembering the night she screamed at me to get out, called me bad luck, and cursed the baby inside me. I said nothing. I didn't have to. 2 police officers stood beside me, waiting patiently. This wasn't personal anymore. It was legal. And irreversible. "You have 2 hours," I said calmly. "I'll wait outside with my son." And I did. I sat on the bench across the street, under the same tree where I once stood helpless. This time, I wasn't shivering. I wasn't broken. I was whole. 2 hours later, they came out one by one, carrying bags, suitcases, boxes. No servants helped them. No relatives welcomed them. They left in a taxi, small, silent, and invisible. The same way I once did. I walked back into the house with Zayn beside me. He looked around, his eyes wide. "Mama, is this really our house now?" I knelt down and held his face in my hands. "It always was," I whispered. "They just borrowed it for a while." He smiled, unaware of the weight those words carried. We walked through each room together, my son and I. We opened windows that hadn't seen sunlight in years. We wiped dust off memories. We sat in the garden Rafik had once planted flowers in, and I told Zayn stories about the father he never met. Stories they tried to erase. But I remembered them all. And now, I had the power to pass them on, truthfully. That night, I lit a candle for Rafik and placed it by the window. "I kept my promise," I whispered. "I protected our son. I survived. And I came back." The flame flickered gently, like a silent nod from the universe. They had thrown me out with nothing but a suitcase and a curse. I had returned with justice, a son, and a strength they couldn't destroy. And I wasn't done yet. It didn't take long for the story to spread. The same neighbors who once whispered about me being a curse were now talking in hushed tones about how I had returned, not broken, not bitter, but powerful. The woman they had watched walk out in the rain with swollen feet and a shattered heart was now the legal owner of everything the respectable family once held. And it hit them harder than anyone expected. I didn't need to make a scene. I didn't call the press or announce my victory to the world. No, I let the silence speak. The same silence they gave me when I begged for mercy. A few days after I reclaimed the house, my lawyer finalized the transfer of Rafik's business shares back into my name. His siblings had tried to merge them with their own interests, falsifying documents, altering titles, pretending I never existed. But the court shredded their lies into pieces. The bank accounts they used as personal treasure chests? Frozen, audited, then drained back to me. I sold my shares in one of the joint ventures for a price they never imagined, investing it instead into a new women-led brand I had quietly built from the shadows. The same brand that started on a second-hand sewing machine. Now, it was gaining momentum, gaining headlines, gaining power. It wasn't revenge I wanted. It was recognition, from the world, and from myself. And as I built, they crumbled. His mother and siblings were forced to move into a rented apartment on the outskirts of the city, a far cry from the luxury they once flaunted. No servants, no imported furniture, no branded clothing, only debts and dwindling pride. They reached out to me, of course they did. First through lawyers, then relatives, then old family friends. All with the same message. Let bygones be bygones. Family is family. Family? I laughed when I read that. Was family what they called themselves the night they threw me out like trash? Was it family when they stood and watched me beg, holding my stomach, while they called me a curse? I ignored every message. And then they tried a different strategy: sympathy. A distant aunt came to visit me one afternoon, unannounced, carrying a plate of sweets and stories of how sorry they all were. They're suffering now, she said, eyes wide with fake concern. They've learned their lesson. Maybe it's time to forgive. I stared at the sweets for a moment. Then I gently pushed the plate away. Forgiveness doesn't always mean returning to what broke you, I replied. She looked stunned. You've changed. Yes, I had. I wasn't cruel. I didn't seek revenge in fire and fury. But I was done being weak. For years, I had suffered in silence while they thrived on stolen power. Now the roles had changed, and they couldn't handle it. But I didn't rejoice in their fall. I didn't need to. Because I had something they would never have again. Peace. One evening, while sorting through old files in Rafik's study, now restored to how he left it, I found a dusty journal. His handwriting filled the pages, soft reflections of a man who loved deeply. There was one line that broke me. If anything ever happens to me, I just hope Alia knows how much I believed in her. I closed the book and wept, not out of pain, but because I finally felt seen. Even in death, he had stood by me more than his living family ever had. It gave me the strength to do what came next. I created a foundation, under Rafik's name. One that supported single mothers, women abandoned by their families, women labeled as curses. Women like me. I poured my resources into it. I gave women jobs in my brand. I gave them shelter, respect, a second chance. I didn't destroy his family. I just stopped protecting them from the consequences of their actions. And as they watched me on magazine covers, TV interviews, and social media feeds, they realized what they had truly lost. Not just property, not just business, but the daughter-in-law, the sister-in-law, the woman they once buried under shame, who rose from the ashes like something divine. And what hurt them most? They no longer had access to the empire they once sat atop. Because I was the gatekeeper now. And the gates were shut tight. Word spread fast, faster than I expected. The family that once held their heads high in society, that walked around with smug pride, was now being whispered about behind closed doors. Not for their wealth or respect, but for their fall. After the court returned everything that rightfully belonged to me, the house, the business shares, the accounts, they lost more than just property. They lost their status. His siblings had used Rafik's assets to build their lives, but now those lives were unraveling. Their bank accounts were frozen. Their homes were mortgaged. The luxury cars? Sold. The servants? Gone. And suddenly, I was the one everyone wanted to talk to. They tried to reach me through distant relatives, lawyers, even neighbors. Messages filled with regret, apologies, excuses. We didn't know. We were scared. It was grief. No, it was greed. And I had no space left for excuses. I didn't respond to a single message. I didn't return a single call. Because the woman they threw away was gone. In her place stood someone they couldn't recognize and couldn't touch. I watched from a distance as they struggled to rebuild, as they fought among themselves, as they sank under the weight of their own guilt and lies. But I didn't laugh. I didn't feel joy in their suffering. I simply felt free. Because real revenge wasn't in making them suffer. It was in rising so high, they could never look me in the eye again. It was at a business conference, one of those high-profile events where powerful people shook hands under chandeliers. I had been invited to speak about resilience and rebuilding after loss. I stood on that stage, speaking to a crowd that once would have ignored me, dressed in confidence, armed with truth. After the applause, as I stepped down, I saw her, Rafik's younger sister. She stood at the back, her eyes wide, her body stiff, like she hadn't expected to see me like this. She hesitated, then walked toward me. Each step looked heavier than the last. "I didn't think you'd remember me," she said quietly. "How could I forget?" I replied. She looked away, ashamed. "I came to say I'm sorry. For everything." There was silence between us. Years of it. Thick and heavy. "I said horrible things to you," she whispered. "We all did. We thought we were protecting our family, but we destroyed it instead." I stared at her, not with anger, not even sadness. Just calm. "You said I would die alone," I said softly. She looked like she wanted to disappear. "But I didn't," I added. "I lived. I raised my son. And I became everything you said I'd never be." Her eyes welled with tears. "You're not a curse," she said. "You never were." I nodded. "I know." And I walked away. Not out of spite, but because closure doesn't always come with hugs or apologies. Sometimes, it comes when the past sees you and realizes it lost something it can never get back. Sometimes, late at night, I still pass by the street where it all began. The house. The gate. The porch where they stood and called me a curse. I don't go there to gloat. I go there to remember. To remind myself of the woman who once stood in the rain, holding her belly, watching the only home she knew vanish behind a slamming door. I remember her silence, her pain, her fear. And I remember how no one came for her. But she didn't die. She didn't disappear. She rebuilt herself in the shadows. Quietly. Fiercely. Brick by brick. And now, she walks those same streets without flinching. Zayn is 7 now. Bright. Gentle. Curious. He knows pieces of the story, enough to understand that his mother is stronger than most people ever need to be. One day, he asked me, "Mama, do you ever wish things happened differently?" I paused, then smiled. "No," I said, "because if they hadn't thrown me out, I might have never learned how to rise." The truth is, I did return, but not for revenge. Not for them. I returned for me. To take back my voice, my name, my dignity. And in doing so, I became someone they could no longer recognize. Because by the time I came back, everything had changed, including me.